Good evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Tonight is our third community forum. We have a few slides to kind of revisit what we've covered so far. And then we have a distinguished panel here that we can kind of turn questions over to that can kind of support and give a perspective about after-school events, extracurricular, athletics, and community events as well. So just to again revisit and set a context for the evening, we're looking at a later start to try to give students an opportunity to have a little bit more time in the morning and to also kind of better meet their needs and just need for having more time. As students at the secondary level, usually sometimes from 8th grade on, when they're moving into adolescence, what they do is they stay up later, but they also sleep later in the morning. So having a little extra time in the morning has been a benefit for school systems that have made this change. Again, context setting for the Middlesex League, we are one of 2 districts that have yet to make this change. Woburn has already kind of negotiated this process, but they have yet to make the change. So I anticipate that they would make this change probably in the next year as well, in moving in the same direction as the rest of the Middlesex League. But in regard to just revisiting the science around this and what we learned in our first community forum with Dr. Judy Owens, again, teens tend to stay up later and also kind of stay in bed longer in the morning. And so we are looking to just try to realign the day or make a recommendation to school committee to realign the day to give extra time to our students in the morning. Because our school system is interrelated and we use a fixed number of buses, we use 9 buses to serve elementary, middle, and high school, right? And so that's why we stagger times. And so transportation is a big part of this conversation as well. And we'll cover more of that as we go through our discussion. So we talked about the Middlesex League. I made note of this earlier. So these are the times and the changes have been made. And so some of the districts have made changes in their time from 7:30 to 8 o'clock and just kind of reflecting on, a 30-minute change or a 25-minute change. I don't know if that is an ideal number of minutes or if that's going to give students what they may need if we were to make this change here in Wakefield. So we likely would be making a recommendation that would be in the 40 to 60-minute range for a later start, especially at secondary. So in just taking a look at the school committee and the administration and what we've been doing. So we got together earlier this year. We've met with a fellow superintendent, one of my colleagues, Superintendent Eric Conti from Burlington, who joined our subcommittee meeting for student services. We learned quite a bit. Eric shared with us that community forum and events like this is the way to go to open up this conversation, to get as much feedback, to also provide information to the community is really kind of the best way to go. They had 2 community forums. We're looking at having 3. And then at the end of this, as we've shared, the group the subcommittee will be making a recommendation to the larger school committee, likely 3 recommendations. They would be making a recommendation A, which would be a late start that could look like, one set of times, a later start B, which could be another set of times, and then C would be no change at this time, right? After that happens, we would likely be working with the Wakefield Educators Association over the next year before we open the new high school, and the change will be made in September of 26. So again, that's if the change is made, and that's what we're looking at. So I would like to turn it over to the panel at this point and let the panel share what they have learned from their colleagues in other districts. And they can also answer questions for you as well. So, Tom, I think you're up.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Bankert. I'm the Director of Visual Performing Arts for the district. In preparing for this, reached out to my colleagues around the Middlesex League, performing arts directors, high school teachers, and what they've done in this transition, and kind of gotten their feedback as to the pros and cons. Talking to them, the biggest con that they've had has to do with busing, which you'll hear from Mr. Murphy as well. Dealing with the busing situation and getting students to different events with a later start, and having to deal with that more, as well as rehearsal space and practice space, which we'll hear with athletics as well. So a lot of the concerns that we have and the things that we're going to have to deal with are the same with performing arts and with athletics. From a positive perspective, they have really enjoyed, everyone that's responded has said that it's been a good transition. The kids are more awake when they have them during the day, and then the after school times haven't had any changes as far as attendance and the availability of the kids in those rehearsals. So that's been the feedback that I've received from a music, theater, and art perspective.
Hi, everybody. Mike Murphy, new athletic director here. Similarly to Tom, I reached out to the Middlesex League athletic directors. Again, you can see by the times, most of them have already done this. Again, kind of trying to figure out the pros and the cons. So some of it being an unknown in terms of what actual time we would be going with. So just kind of working with hypotheticals from a me standpoint. Athletic busing has been a challenge already, and we start at 7:30 in the morning. So will that remain the same? Will that change a little bit, or will that be more difficult? Is kind of what everybody seems to think in terms of, if school ends later, you can't get anywhere on time. We've moved games from, at some point in the last couple of years, from 4 to 4:15. I imagine the league would then start to look at moving game times a little later in the day, really for the fall, starting at no earlier than 4:30. And teams now are showing up late regardless. So will that change? Will that become more difficult? I think it's probably a little bit of both there. And then, I don't know, more importantly, the practice time for us would certainly change too. And again, depending on who you talk to and who likes to put numbers on it, 75% of the time is practice, right? So right now, if we're using winter as an example, we have our track team going from 2:30 to 4:30, boys or girls basketball 4:30 to 6:30, and then 6:30 to 8:30 for that final time slot. So if we moved those by an hour, it's either going later into the night and or cutting practice times, which could be a possibility in terms of, do we need 2 hours or an hour and a half? Or are we comfortable with the later times? So on top of that, that's everybody at the high school for the most part, talking winter, which is our current season. So the outside, hockey rinks, swimming pools, all of the fun that we try to schedule now also could become a bit of a challenge. And to use hockey, we're trying to practice at 3 o'clock now at both Stoneham Arena and Hockeytown. And we're one of the only schools in the area that can make that time. So again, moving later, can we not make that time? We have to find different ice time in probably different swim times, depending on, the girls in the fall, the boys currently swim with Linfield. So it's just a puzzle. Again, once we have all of this information, whatever the decision is, I think part of the fun of athletics is trying to solve that problem and trying to figure out some space. Are there new hockey arenas or swimming pools that we don't know about yet? Probably not, but are there relationships that we can build? So those are the biggest things. And again, kind of the general standpoint too, and depending on how, which students you believe to talk to. And is there time for extra help after school? All of those things when we're trying to run to a bus to get to a game, and now we're rushing on the back end if you think of it that way. So again, could be a problem, could be a fun problem to have. We'll figure that part out when we get there.
We had talked, can you hear me? Okay. We had talked with Dan McGrath from Wakefield Rec. He unfortunately had a family emergency, so he couldn't make it here tonight. But I think we can speak for Dan, and he just said that he'll make whatever work that he needs to based on our schedules. He is obviously thinking about youth sports practices that are heavily dependent on what the school practices and schedules are, and just trying to be mindful of keeping kids out, at reasonable times and that sort of thing. So similar to what Mike was saying, he had said he would just need to be exploring, looking at facility space, field space, timing, and then seeing what we do and then working around that. But he's a great partner and said he's happy to work with us on wherever we land. I don't know if there's anything else, but Dan.
Yeah, Dan also shared that Reading has made this change. They're in year 2 of this change. And they made a change in their start times by 60 minutes. So that's kind of where Reading is in this process.
Good evening, I'm Andrea Baez. I'm the Chief Program Officer for the Boys and Girls Club of Metro North. Our issues would be a little different. We employ young people after school. So with our younger kids getting out earlier and our older kids getting out a little bit later, it would certainly pose a challenge for staffing. I do think that we could work creatively and easily with the district, whichever decision that they made. We would have to obviously figure out alternative staffing plans until our high schoolers got out of school, because we would never want to not afford them the opportunity to work after school. Like you said, it would be a puzzle. It would probably be a fun, slightly stressful puzzle to figure out while we navigated all of the things that we had to navigate, but we are fully committed to ensuring that our teens can still work and our after-school programs are still open and our young people can join us after school.
Obviously, we have similar concerns. We employ a great deal of high school students in our program, and, it would make a dramatic shift for us if they start later than our little ones are getting out earlier. However, Wakefield Academy has always prided itself in ensuring that not only our families have the coverage that they need to move about their schedules freely and without stress, but also that our staff equally has that support. So our goal is to ensure that we work with this puzzle and make sure that everybody is supported and everyone has confidence in the decisions that we make, no matter which option is presented. So we'll work very closely with administration, schools, staff, and our families to make sure that that coverage is provided.
Estelle, can you say a little bit more? I think one of the questions that we often get is if there's a later start in the morning and it impacts elementary, for example, would there be time, would Wakefield Academy adjust for morning times and afternoon times?
Yes, absolutely. We would definitely adjust our schedule. Our staff has already reached out to us to ensure that they're willing to work with us to make sure that we have that coverage, no matter what the start and end time is for the mornings or afternoons.
Great, thank you so much. I think we can take questions from the audience.
You're in the front row.
Go ahead, Jess. I'll repeat your question. Correct.
What that looked like for high school, middle, and elementary as well.
Right now, I just have their high school change. I don't have their elementary and middle change. Right? So I know they also do not have the same situation with buses that we have. So. Other thoughts, questions? Mr. Fontanello?
Here comes Ian.
when you're looking at competition for rehearsal space and field space, with the new high school, I kind of forgot the specs of like if we had more, like more fields, more indoor space, when you have basketball and gymnastics and everyone competing. I was wondering if with the new high school, is there more basic space that would help maybe mitigate the idea that we'd have to go later into the night for practice and rehearsal?
I think that depends on, when fields become available. So for example, Beasley the new Beasley field will not be built at the same time we're entering the new high school. So they would be down one field. So that would impact us in a negative way. The potential positive there is that the Voc is a little bit ahead of us. And then just preparing for this meeting tonight, we've reached out to the Voc to just talk with them about that in terms of opportunities to share fields and maybe access their fields that they might not be using in the evening. And they've said that they absolutely would help us out if we need that support.
We turned it, oh, there we go. Just to chime in on that, I think, again, currently we don't have that field, right? So we're making things work as we need to. So if anything, once that field is ready, we'll kind of get we'll be back to business. But our teams, coaches and kids have been awesome so far. Again, being the newest member here, probably just getting to see, how, everybody's taking things in stride has been pretty cool to see. And again, I think Wakefield's in a good spot with the number of fields in courts that we have. So, I think, again, to come back to the puzzle piece, I think it would just be another, can we practice here more? Is there more opportunity to do that? Would it make sense to send freshmen and or JV teams over here more? So what that looks like, again, I think we're in a decent shape in terms of that field space, but it would just become a different.
And then just from an indoor space, like you mentioned, rehearsal space, it'll be a net neutral when the high school opens. So we'll be in the same place we are now.
Sorry, I just wanted to know what the current latest start time practice is for the high school student. Does anybody know?
What our current
Yeah.
latest time is, make sure. I think it depends on the day, if you will. The latest game that we'll start there would be 7 for the most part. I take that back because I just thought of hockey. So we start hockey at 8. So generally I would say 8 to 9:30 is probably the latest time slot in terms of a game or a practice. And then our boys who swim with Linfield are at the PBD YMCA from 8:30 to 10. I guess I'm just correcting myself as I speak. So it does get later, and from a youth standpoint too, and to speak for, or when we spoke with Dan McGrath, right, he does a great job with us in kind of allowing the high school teams to kind of get on their fields, our fields, get our games in, get our practices in. And then he does a great job of, if we're done at 6, they're on at 6 o'clock in 30 seconds. So trying to make all of that work would be the toughest piece. So, but again, a little bit of give and take. So not currently. We've been offered early ice time at certain hockey arenas, and we haven't decided to go that route. I think, again, just from how my brain operates, if we're going to start school later and have the kids sleep in a little more, to then have them wake up for practice before school, I think it's I don't know if that's what word I'm looking for there, but it seems like it would be yeah, sure. Yeah, let's go with that one. We could, is the short answer.
Question for Estelle. So my understanding, just from some of the emails I've gotten from you this year, is that staffing has been a little bit more challenging. And, I guess I'm just sort of wondering if the high school kids end up getting out later than the elementary school kids, given that there are a number of high school kids that participate in Wakefield Academy to make it run. I'm just curious if you have any, if you brainstormed any sort of thoughts on how, you might deal with that, and just the staffing situation in general.
Yes, as you can imagine, the dismissal time, arrival time for Wakefield Academy in the afternoon is a very tricky time for us. We do rely heavily on our high school helpers or assistants, sorry. But I can say the good thing is we'd have a year out to brainstorm ideas. And just in the limited discussions we've had with throwing around different timelines and hypothesis around it, we were looking at involving our schools, in supporting us and helping us. Additionally, we can front load with other staff members to ensure, and we can change the arrival process to make sure that it's a very organized, more detailed process, maybe a little more broken up. That would allow us to have a lesser need for as many staff. So if we break up the kids a little bit more, they tend to be a little less, rambunctious at the end of the day, and we can use less staff to control that. So, but we are actively thinking about it. And like I said, the great thing is we do have a year plus to think out these processes to make sure that we have that coverage. And we also want to make sure our high school assistants have all the hours that they want to, because we absolutely love having them, and our students adore our high schoolers. They don't want us around. We're mom, so they really love those high schoolers. They walk on water. So
Thank you.
thank you.
I have two questions. First, I was curious, Tom and Mike, are you and your departments on board with this change? I know it presents a pretty hefty challenge for both of you, but I was just curious whether you would say that you're in favor of this change or not.
I don't feel like I'm at a point that I know enough about what it's gonna look like. Like I want to see proposals just like everyone else does, especially, as a resident of town, like it affects my kids too. So it's like kind of a twofold responsibility from my end. But having this opportunity to do the research and get more information from people that have gone through it and look at what the schedules, run the hypotheticals, look at what things could be. I'm just not at a point that I know and have enough information at this point to say yes or no. I think what I can say is I'm thankful that we're having forums like this and I'm being included in the conversation and trying to get a sense of what's going to work best for everybody, including what's going to happen in the performing arts department.
I would echo that, and again, just from the conversations that I've had, the information that I've gathered, I would, and again, athletic sports people are fun people to talk to. Again, it feels like to them in the stuff that I'm getting, there seems to be more cons than pros. But it's all centered around that busing, traffic, getting to games, getting places, right? So again, we practice more than we play. Games are a huge part of it. And to be quite honest, I answer that with, we have busing issues currently. So again, it's a problem busing can be a problem, but it's one that we're currently solving, and we think outside the box. We have coaches that are open to driving kids in our white vans. So, we're doing what we have to do already. So, and if, again, 10 out of 12 teams are later in the day, so would it impact us to that point? I can't say it would, but again, same kind of thing. I don't necessarily think we have a set time yet, so what would it look like if, I'm a very visual guy, so I would want to create a schedule based off of that hypothetical start time and see what makes the most sense.
Thanks. My second question was, out of the 10 towns that have already done this, do we know if any of those towns have done any sort of like success measures or surveys for the schools, the sports, the arts, families? Because just because people are making it work doesn't necessarily mean people are happy with it. So I was just curious if there's any success measures.
I think in just hearing from superintendents who've gotten feedback that's anecdotal, there have been challenges with families. And I think, but in terms of success metrics, it's more qualitative than quantitative. And I think it's mixed, right? I think that there are challenges in areas where the communities have adjusted. Some have adjusted easier than others. So for example, if we go back to the slide with times, for example, I believe it's Belmont that went to, I think, a 7:30 to an 8 o'clock start. You know, that's a 30-minute change. I think that start was a little bit easier to manage than Reading with, for example, that might have a 60-minute start. So I think it's really all about, not all about, no matter what change we make, it's going to affect personnel, it's going to affect families. But I think what we're trying to do is just make a recommendation to school committee that might have a chance at having a positive impact on students. So should we be presenting more information from those districts? I think we should, Laura, and I think we can. And I think that will be forthcoming, I think in the recommendations or with the recommendations that we make to school committee.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
So as it is right now, our youth sports teams, and I'm thinking particularly in my experience in the fall, some of them start practice, and I know Dan McGrath isn't here, and that's too bad. I apologize for that. But some of them start practice 8:30 and after. And in my experience as a high school coach, we take precedence. We start first, we get on the field, those are our fields, everybody else is off, youth starts after us. Also, in my experience as a high school coach, there are so many of us who coach high school who can start earlier than the youth volunteers. Youth volunteers tend to have 9 to 5 jobs, as opposed to the whatever start time it is to 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. So has there been any exploration into how much later, if high school practices are starting later, hypothetically, how much later will our youth teams have to start? Because like I said, as it is right now, I know some of them are starting at 8 o'clock or after.
So I think, I don't know, would be my first answer. And I think, again, when Dan and I spoke, we were talking as a team the other day, it was that exact conversation, right? Now we're allowing, or we're starting the older kids later, but keeping the younger kids up later, right? So when you say that out loud, does it make sense? But that's when conversations like, can we use the vocational fields comes up? Can we get creative with our scheduling in terms of what other options are there? Are there youth coaches that could, I don't know, right? Can we practice earlier and we go later? I don't know if that would work. Does it work every day? Does it work 2 days a week, 3 days a week? That's why when I say a puzzle, that's what it would become. A solvable one, I think, but again, we've had those same conversations already, and I think the question is, does that make sense? So, yeah, it's a good question.
I think I would add to that, Mike is new to his position. And, one of the things that these conversations has led to are asking the questions, right? Like, as the Voc is completing their new fields, what does that look like for the future in regard to our access or us being able to share, right? And so these are conversations that we haven't had in the past because we haven't needed to have them. But I think whatever recommendation we make and whatever decision that school committee makes, I think at the end of this process, I think we're gonna have probably better schedules or schedules that are more vetted than they were before we started, because we're looking at all of these things. And even, Jess, you make a great point, which is even without a later start, some of our youth sports are going later than we know, right? Later than we're seeing, right? And, hockey is one where it's not uncommon for kids to have 8:30 ice or 9:30 ice. I could be off with that, and maybe things have changed in a short time since I've been a hockey parent. I know some of our school committee members are on the board of youth hockey, so they could probably speak to it better than I. But this process has kind of opened up a conversation that we haven't really had in a long time, where we're looking at kind of the whole day and the access of fields and courts and ice. And so I think that one of the byproducts that I think I'm excited about is that I think we're gonna end up with better schedules where and when possible, no matter what decision is made or no matter what decision school committee makes. Other questions?
I know we probably don't have data on percentage of Wakefield Public School students that are involved in youth sports, but do we have a percentage of students that are involved in athletics in high school?
So I don't have the percentage, I would say.
What's the highest for a season?
Yeah, so we had 365 or so in the fall, 330 in the winter, give or take a couple. And then I assume, just based off of kind of projecting out, we're gonna be right around that same number, 330, 340 in the spring. And I say I don't have the percentage, how many of those are 3-sport athletes, 2-sport athletes? So, right, because
Yeah,
clearly
no,
that
I
number's over
understand. Yeah,
1,000, and if we have 840 in the high school, we're not making up bodies, but
Yeah.
what percentage of students are participating? And I mean, I have to gather it's a good percentage, and then if they're not in athletics, we're talking drama, theater, band, right, all of the things. So again, for me being new, to see how many kids are involved in something has been pretty awesome, so.
Thank you.
Quite a few.
Same question, Mr. Bankert.
Yeah, so we don't have seasons per se as
Right.
much like split up, but from like through the school year, we're up over 250.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Trying to use my wait time thoughtfully here. If there are other questions, happy to take them. Ian, this was, WCAT is telecasting this and people can access via Zoom, correct? So is there any questions online that we might be able to address?
Right now, I believe we do not have any. Let me double check.
I think I have one right now. Check it. All this says is, it seems like we still have little answers. Will the impact on youth sports and after school be fully explained before recommendations are made?
It's kind of a loaded question. I think to the degree that we can explain that, based on information that we're getting from other districts, yes. But there will be information that will be specific to Wakefield. It's like all problems are local, that we will experience, maybe that other towns have not experienced, that we will need to address or figure out if we are going to make this change, when we do make this change.
You know, we spoke about this before and someone had a question about like metrics that we don't necessarily have. I guess it's a two-part question I have. The first is, what kind of initiated this thought process? Like, were we looking at the comparison of how our Wakefield students did, you know, as far as academics and achievement in comparison to these other towns? Right? Were we doing that and said, oh, you know, we're maybe falling behind, and let's look for every advantage we can for our, you know, our high school students to kind of, you know, catch up? Or are we still on par with them? And has there been any change with these other schools in comparison to how our students do, right? Our high school students and everybody else, just generally, like, is there a difference between them? And if there's no difference, it kind of goes to that whole, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? It's been working, students have been doing well. And it looks like there are, you know, while there are like certain problems, athletics and some other things and after school times, we've adapted and been able to take advantage of earlier, let's say ice times, et cetera, stuff like that, where we could fit in our sports. You know, it seems like why make the change when there's so many things that you'd have to consider too that might be cons, right? I guess what's the payout? Like, why would we be looking to do that? Did we find that we weren't doing well? Do we find that there is really a need for this to happen? And again, what's the payout?
It's like a 12-part question, right? Very thoughtful. No, I appreciate the question. So I'm going to try to repeat back what I think your high points were. And if I miss any, please restate them or let me know, would you? Right? And so first, why would we initiate the change? I think we're initiating this change because we feel like the science says that it has a benefit for students, right? So that's what brings us here. We've agreed to kind of initiate this work with our partner districts in the league. Many have made the change ahead of us, and they have entered into the work with the same intent as we are entering into this work, which is the science suggests that a later start is better for kids at the secondary level, right? So that's the why. In terms of your question about comparing, are we doing better than other districts? The answer is yes, we are doing better than other districts in the Middlesex League. Yes. Yes. Are we better in a lot of ways? Yes. That we can measure and point to? Absolutely. Does that mean that we're not broke or shouldn't try to investigate or research ways to be better? I think we should. And from my perspective, that's what we're doing. At the end of the day, you know, we're thoughtfully going to make a recommendation with the Student Services Subcommittee to the larger school committee. And that recommendation will be based on the information that we've collected. We believe that this has the potential to make a difference for kids, especially at the secondary level, based on the science and based on changes that have been made. Whether we make the change or we don't, it's not going to stop us from thinking about how to improve the district and especially how to improve outcomes for kids. So that's kind of the quick answer. I feel like you're warming up for another part of that question.
And Sid just said that, you know, we just looking at how we compare and stack up to other schools that are in our league, not, you know, athletically, but more academically. I think that would give us an easy metric, right? That some of these schools that have recently changed, have they, you know, caught up, surpassed, stayed the same? And I know there's a bunch of other different variables that may affect it, but if we're looking kind of one-to-one, if they did something, you know, to kind of improve their performance, right? Like change their start time recently and, you know, compare the last, I don't know, let's say 5, 10 years
Yeah.
and see if that change has actually impacted anything for them. And I guess those are easy metrics for success to see whether or not this is really worth doing.
Yeah, I think, in terms of how we stack up, my gosh, fine and performing arts, I don't know there's anyone better. In athletics, I think we're at the top of the Middlesex League and have been for the last 8 years, 10 years. So in terms of athletics and extracurricular, I think we're kind of, in a lot of respects, leading the way. You know, I'm a little biased. I'm the superintendent, so please, you know, Tom and Mike can probably speak to this better than I.
They're really good.
Jess, could you say that again? So
So I'm hearing your question more revolving around academics, things during the day, you know, what we're doing for kids during the school day and how this could affect the research, if there's research that shows how that could affect that. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, I'm just saying now, like if we're looking at it, yeah, it was more geared towards academics.
Yeah.
And it's about like, we can look at, we have metrics, and we talked about like success metrics. If we're saying that some of these other schools have recently done that, they maybe did it for the same reasons, same research that we're looking at doing it now. We should, all things being equal, right, we should be able to look at their, you know, their state and district, you know, profiles, their performance on MCAS, et cetera, and see whether or not they've had maybe they've widened the gap if they were, you know, doing better than us, or if it stayed the same, right, with the change. And that would be I would say an easy metric. Obviously, there's more into it, but that'd be something we should be looking at to see whether or not the changes that we'd be making and whether it's affecting our youth sports going later and they're going, you know, having to go to, you know, bed later because of field time or et cetera. If busing changes and having to shift them around, getting whatever else extracurricular. And if we do that, is it worth it based on the amount of boost that these other communities maybe got or didn't get at all academically?
Yeah, so what I would say is, I think that's another piece of this puzzle. Like, we keep talking about the puzzle, right? So it's a big puzzle with a lot of pieces, and obviously the academic piece is a huge one. The extracurricular piece is a huge one. The athletics piece is a huge one. And then you get into how the trickle down of what this decision does. If it goes and affects youth sports, it can affect, it's not just youth sports. You know, there are dance studios in town that have late classes. There are, you know, how many of our kids play club sports? And so that's a whole another monster. So there's all these trickle down pieces that these forums and these conversations are helping us kind of put together. And like Doug has said, to put together what we think is the best recommendation for our kids. Because our kids are different than kids in every other town. And our situation is different than kids' situations in other towns. So we need to get as much information as we can, which is what we're doing, to provide the best end game and result for our kids, for the students of Wakefield. I'm not really answering your question, I know, but it's something that's going to be put in, that we need to put it into the kind of the pot here and look at that and make that a consideration. Absolutely.
So I would, to sort of answer part of your question, Alex, I would go back to sort of the first forum that we had when we had Dr. Judy Owens here speaking. I think what she talked about in that, in that forum was that, she and people like her that sort of study this, have a whole like boatload of data. And what she sort of cautioned against was that if you're looking to see the results of this in test scores, you will not find it. That it doesn't move the needle so much as so many other factors that factor into sort of what causes success for students in academics, that this particular thing is not something that you can necessarily quantify, but it was quality and where it showed up, where it's, you know, sort of just how kids carry themselves throughout their day, how it affects them. And so that was just one thing that stuck with me when she was talking. That was one sort of something that she like stood on for a minute, paused. And just as people do think about, you would think, we can see this in metrics, we can see it in test scores. She very clearly sort of cautioned against it as a person that has seen so much of this data related to sleep, related to students, and how it sort of has been affecting sort of districts across the country. One thing I think is worth noting, to go back to your other thing about how we sort of got here, and one thing that sticks in my head is that this was a student proposal out of a civics class that they had at the high school, where they see something that maybe they could work towards bettering in the community. And that student made a presentation to the Wakefield Health Department and then brought it in front of the school district and sort of asked us if we could sort of take a look at it with all the science. And we dove in a little bit deeper on it. So if you're looking for sort of the genesis of sort of how the conversation got started, I think it's worth noting that it was one of our students that sort of, who is since, I think, graduated. So wouldn't necessarily see the payout, but was interested in sort of looking at the science and for students. So that was all.
I apologize. I was at the mercy of the commuter rail trying to get here. But the slides that you presented, I missed all of them. Do they live somewhere when you're done? You're going to send them out similar to the first forum, I'm guessing?
They do, they live on WCAT.
Perfect.
They are recorded events.
Perfect. And then as far, I overheard kind of the phrasing was, you'll have Estelle said something, we'll have a year to kind of plan and figure this out. When are we thinking about starting this exactly? Is it a year from now? Like not this upcoming school year, but the year after?
So if we're gonna make a change,
Mhm.
the anticipated start date would be September of 26,
2026.
right? That would also coincide with the opening of the new high school.
So
Which is
every,
supposed to be in January of 27, full disclosure. not
Okay.
September 26, right?
I'm just trying to figure out as far, as a resident of street, or what the changing of times will look like. The high school will start later. Will it affect the start times of the elementary and middle school as well? And have those all been
Potentially.
published somewhere I've missed along the way?
Well, because we use the same buses, we use the same 9 buses for
Right.
all of our schools, all of our levels. And right now we have, the high school starts first, the middle school second, and then elementary third.
Yep.
There would have to be that sequence where we have first, second, and third, right?
Right.
And so, that's what would need to happen. So what takes the first place, is kind of the big question, right? And, Galvin, full disclosure, we changed start times. We have a little bit more time, instructional time this year. So Galvin is starting at 7:45. And there seems to be no ripples on the pond in that change, right? And so, and I think, I'm sure we will get feedback as we make recommendations to school committee. And if they make the decision for the district to move forward and we impact bargain this with our teachers, I'm sure we'll get plenty of feedback around, what should be in the first space, what should be in the second space, and what should be in the third space, right?
But do you think, I know you have to change them all because you'll need the buses, but do you anticipate in that first school year, you'll change all 3, or you'll just make the high school start the latest and you won't really make much changes to the other
So-
2?
Yeah, so that's a tricky question. So, when we say someone has to be in the first position, so this is just a hypothetical.
Yeah.
We do not have established times. But let's say the middle school, and, when I worked with the middle school, they said, the 7:40 start time has been kind of a windfall for us, and we would like to stay in the first position. Now, please, this is me, these are my words, not kind of the negotiated process, right? So, but if they said 7:45 really works great for us, we would like to be in the first position. High school, if we're looking at 40 to 60-minute change, could they be in the second position? They might be able to. And elementary could still stay in the third position, right? So there are different scenarios where that could happen, and that would be, that wouldn't be that dramatic of a change. So, but there are other scenarios where, if elementary's in the first position, that might create different challenges. So we're still not ready to make that recommendation, right? Again, we're gonna be debriefing this information and improving, this presentation before we move to committee, the final recommendation to school committee, where again, we're gonna be making, an A, a B, and a C, right? So I hope I answered your question.
No, I'm nowhere near the high school. I'm came more so because I'm a Woodville parent and
Yep.
it very much affects,
Yes.
so
So-
I'm just curious if the elementary school would be starting earlier, or right now we have an 8:40 start time. And if you were looking to start at 8:35, that would not be feasible. But I'm just trying to see where the change occurs for the
So
elementary as well.
I think there is a scenario where that could be feasible. So for example, again, this is just a scenario for discussion. If middle started at 7:45, the high school started at 8:15, and elementary started at 8:40, that's a scenario.
Thank you. No, that's helpful for me to understand. And it all lives on all the forums, like with all the information live
Yeah.
there. Thank you. That's helpful for me.
Certainly. And as we, polish these recommendations more and kind of get times on paper, I think that it will be helpful for people to kind of think more about their schedules and how it might impact their children, their families, and kind of how they could possibly make it work, right?
Just going back to the topic of metrics again for just a moment. Well, so point taken that test scores, I can imagine don't correlate very well with measuring success for a move like this. But it seems to me that maybe something that would correlate well with measuring success, that at the very least is easy to compute, is perhaps like absence and tardiness statistics for high school students, because that's data that the other districts should have before and after the change. I mean, I'll just tell you that, back when I was a high school student 800 years ago, it started at 7:25, and, I did not make that 7:25 start time. I missed it more times than I care to admit.
Yeah.
So just point being that, the more that you're actually able to make the class, the more,
Yeah.
the more successful we should be. Just a thought.
I think that that's really good feedback.
Just to add to that, if the science is not calling for us to look at test scores, which I don't know that I necessarily agree with, as far as a metric, it seems like, yes, tardiness and those rates would be very important, as well as, if we're not looking at test scores, what do we have left? We have the reports of teachers. And certainly we could do parents and students as well. But definitely teachers. What is the experience? What is the teaching experience like then? And that is only if we're not looking at test scores, which again, I need to reiterate, I don't necessarily agree with. But I would love to see, can we collect data on that? Can we have surveys? Is it in these other districts, has there been any information, any feedback collected by teachers?
That's a great point, Jess. I think, in meeting with other superintendents that have gone before us, one of the, some of the feedback is to really stay focused on the why, right? And the why we would make this recommendation, or the why we would make this change, is because the science suggest that this is good for students, right? And that would be kind of the lead reason why we would make that change. And so, how teachers, how they feel about this is important. But again, I think our why and the recommendation that we're making is really focused on the science and this kind of implication that this has potentially some benefit to students at secondary level. So I don't want to for a second dismiss that the teachers aren't critical in this space. They are. Yeah, I think, and Dr. Owens shared that for 60 minutes in the first meeting that I thought was pretty comprehensive, and she made a compelling argument that, this is a trend that's happening across the country. And it's a benefit to students. So again, happy to take feedback from any number of different places. And we're not making a recommendation for a change. We're making a recommendation to the school committee around, this is what we think can make a difference for kids. And the school committee will make that change. And then, as you know, right, this will be a negotiated process from there. Okay.
Just to confirm, we don't have any questions from Zoom. That is correct.
We are all set up here.
We want to thank everybody for coming. And thank you to our panelists for being here tonight, and spending time with us. Just so to let everybody know, we are planning, an early release tomorrow. We've already sent that email out. So we are following a regular day early release schedule. And thank you to the students, that have kindly reached out and kind of advised me on the weather and, their desire to have, either an early release or no school. I think that their first choice was no school. But we're going to try to get a little bit of time in the morning. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time and thank you for being here.